We don't have a ton left to cover here, but I wanna cover this and then get started with some actual coding practice problems for all 6 of you. So behavioral questions are very common in interviews as well. They want to make sure that you're a good culture fit. So you could get questions like, describe a technical or group challenge you've overcome and how you overcame it. Or describe a significant technical or group mistake or failure. How did you handle it? Describe a project you worked on that you really enjoyed. Why did you get enjoyment from it? Describe a time when you needed to demonstrate leadership. Time when you were in conflict with another person in a technical setting. How did you resolve the conflict? And then, of course, for any of them, a follow-up could easily be, what would you do differently now? And then a really annoying question, what are your weaknesses? I hate this question in an interview setting, but the best tips that I can give to people are, the worst thing you can do is describe a weakness that's actually a strength. This comes across as extremely cocky. So I work too hard. I have a hard time balancing my work life and my home life, and I'm just so dedicated to my work. That comes across as either fake or trying to get at what they want to hear and not actually, that's not a real weakness. So instead, do actually describe real weaknesses. What they want to hear is, how self-aware are you of areas where you could improve? Describe, in addition to the weakness, describe how you manage that weakness. Anything you're doing to improve that weakness. It shows self-awareness, critical thinking. And just in general, is going to get you significantly farther in an interview, because they recognize everybody has weaknesses. We're all doing our best to work with them, and they just want you to be real. You will, in any interview, be asked if you have any questions for them, and the answer is always yes. So not only should you be ready to ask them questions that come up during the interview, but you should also have a small notebook with you, a list on your phone, something with prepared questions based on your research into the position or into their company and their company's mission. So question targets for you: onboarding, what's the onboarding process? So things like, do I get a mentor to work with as I'm onboarding with the company? What is that process? What is that process like? How am I evaluated during the onboarding? Is there a point where it's determined whether I continue with the company or not? Or is this a permanent position of, you're hired? What do performance reviews look like? Day-to-day on the job. Any questions you have about the day-to-day? In general, you can think about 3 categories of questions to ask. The first is a genuine question. That is a question that you want to know the answer to. So, how does project planning happen on the team? Is an example of a question that you might really want to know the answer to. Or you could turn this back around to the interviewer, and they were in your position at one point as a brand new hire. What brought you to this company? What has been the most challenging aspect of working for the company? What advice would you give someone just starting at this company? And you can get a sense of the company culture by how real are they being with you. If they're talking to you like a friend would, then you know that there's not a ton of HR riding their butt, making sure that they're being extremely professional, and so much so that they can't be real with you. So, as mentioned, questions about the day-to-day. Insightful questions could be questions that you somewhat want to know the answer to, but mostly you want to communicate to the interviewer that you recognize or are aware of some of what goes on in the company. So that could be something like, I noticed you use this particular technology. How do you handle a particular problem based on the fact that you use that technology? Just show that you understand and want to interface with the systems that they're using. It shows them that you're ready to interface with that system. Or, I noticed you designed a solution using this particular protocol over some other protocol. I know it has certain benefits and also certain downsides, but what went into the decision to use that protocol? You can get into the sense of, how does this company make its decisions? What what is important to that company when it comes to making important decisions like that. You could also ask questions like, did you have any input into that, or who made that kind of decision? And that lets you know the power structure in the institution and whether you would have a voice for that once you know what you're talking about. You can also ask them passion questions that just in general demonstrate that you're interested in technology and you're interested in learning, and like, what opportunities exist at the company to learn about scalability, and just say, I would like to learn more about that. I like to phrase those kinds of questions very much like the what opportunities exist, because then they get to brag to you about all of the cool things their company does. You could also say something like, I'm not familiar with a particular technology, but it seems like an interesting solution. Can you tell me a bit about how it works? And it just shows in general that you're passionate about learning and you want to interface with what the company is doing. I would have a list of probably at least 8 questions to ask. I'm always, if I'm giving an interview, much more interested in how curious the person is. Do they come prepared with questions, or are they just along for the ride? If they're just along for the ride, you can tell they don't have very many questions, they just applied to the position, but it's not necessarily meaningful to them. A candidate who really wants that position is going to be asking real questions about that position because they are serious about taking it. So you can show that interest by showing interest in the company and its procedures. Back to those behavioral questions. In general, you want to be specific, but you really don't want to come across as arrogant. You want to give details about yourself, about your projects, about your history with coding, and you just want to speak like it's fact. You don't want to try to sell what you have done while you're talking about it. They're probably not crazy impressed by your project, no matter what it is, or if they are, it will seem much better if you seem like, yeah, this is just another week that I did this and I think it's cool, but I don't think that it means that I'm the best thing since sliced bread. So other things you can do would be to say something bad, like, I did all the difficult parts of this project. That's not, that shows a bit of arrogance, but also that you're not describing, that the interviewer's not learning anything from that response. If you did, you just describe the work that you did briefly but technically. You don't need to talk about other people's involvement unless it's asked. You can just list off, here's what I did, here's how I implemented it, and here's how the project works when I did it. Very matter of fact. And it comes across like you know what you're talking about. It's also important to recognize when you are on a long tangent. You have a certain amount of time for the interview. And if you are talking about one particular project that you did and you're so excited about it and it takes you 10 minutes to talk about it, that's a significant portion of the interview. Really think about, if you're going to say something, what is the interviewer going to get out of it in terms of understanding who you are and what you can contribute. Focus on your own contributions, not what other people have done in the group projects. Just focus on what you did and what you know. You can give structured answers in a couple of different ways. The first is by, it's kind of the way that you would want to write. Talk about what your response is going to be about before going into the details of it. You can also use something called situation, action, result. That just, you describe the situation, you describe what you did, and you describe what happened. So if the interviewer tells you something like, tell me about a time when, then you can use situation, action, result to make sure that that is a very cohesive but succinct answer to that question. Because you're describing just those 3 things, and that won't take you very long, and they'll get an understanding of everything that's important without it taking a lot of time. The dreaded question. This question exists in just about every interview in every field, and nobody likes it. So it's open-ended, and how you respond to this can really set the tone. Usually it's the first thing that they ask you in an interview. And they want to see how you respond to it. So you should prepare for exactly this question. What are you going to say when someone says, so tell me about yourself? Your answer should be structured. Usually something as followed, keep each of these sections really brief. If you're currently working a tech job, talk about your current role. Very brief overview. Here's my title. Here's what I do on the day-to-day. Maybe a sentence for each. If you're a student, your college background and experience. If you were a recent graduate, this is also very relevant. So where did you go to school? What did you study? What are your favorite classes? Here, I really enjoy this aspect of computer science. Choose something that overlaps with the job requirements. One or two sentences about the reasons for why you've explored the jobs that you're interested in, and just talking about what you want to get out of the position that you land. I want to learn more about this. I want to do this cool thing in this field. Outside of work, you can absolutely talk about hobbies, but only talk about hobbies that relate to your interest in the position. You like hiking, great. This doesn't tell the interviewer anything that helps you to land this position. Maybe name drop one thing that you do to showcase that you live a balanced lifestyle, that you have some work-life balance. There's a little bit to gain from that, but for the most part, talk about hobbies that are relevant to the position, things that you do outside of work that continue to help you to become better at what you do. Then the last thing that I would say in this response is just talk about, so given that background, this position makes a lot of sense for how to continue my career, because go back to the job description, go back to the company or the company's mission, something that ties your history back to why you want this position. This entire question should take you 1 to 2 minutes, maybe, to answer. So not a lot of time, but at the same time, at the end of that, the interviewer gets a really good idea of why you're a good fit for this position, how your background is relevant. So hobbies that are unique. So if I breathe fire, if I do fire breathing, then that would be something that is unique, that could spark something, some kind of conversation with the interviewer. Something that's technical. The other thing that I forgot to mention is something that demonstrates a positive personality trait. So if you do things like volunteer every once in a while, bring that up. It might not be your favorite thing to do ever, but it demonstrates that you do work outside of hours for the common good or for something that you care about. It demonstrates a positive personality trait or attribute. Yeah.
So I've kind of been going back and forth with myself on this, so. Do you think it would sound arrogant if I brought up that I played football? Like in college or anything like that?
No.
Because it doesn't really relate to this. But it could show that I might manage time well.
Yeah, I would bring up that part of. I wouldn't just say I played football. You could say I managed this aspect as part of playing football in college, or I learned how to do this really well from my time playing football in college. And that way you recognize and tie some positive trait that you demonstrate to the mention of that. And it's not about the football, it's about what you learned from playing football. When you get to the either preparation for technical questions, so this is mainly targeting how do you prepare for technical questions. The best advice that I can give is don't just look up problems and their solutions as a way to learn. try to actually solve the problems without looking at a solution for it. Only once you get so stuck that it's wasting your time, do you want to try to look at a solution and say, why did I get stuck? How can I learn from how the solution developed itself? But get as far as you can to practice those tools and techniques on your own. Make sure that you solve problems on paper as well as in an IDE, because if you're going to be doing any whiteboard coding as part of any interview, then you need to be familiar enough with the syntax. What people don't really do after they solve problems on paper is go back and write that code in an IDE. I think there's a lot to be learned from trying to just take what you wrote on paper, putting it back in an IDE and say, where are my syntax mistakes? Go group those together and try to learn from them. I usually forget this, or I usually mistake this syntax for this other syntax. Why do I do that? I need to make sure that I'm aware of that in an interview setting, so that if I'm going to use this particular tool, I'm writing it syntactically on the board. You also want to get familiar with testing your code, thinking about how your code would execute as you write it on paper. So make sure that you're thinking about general cases, if it's recursive, base cases, error cases. Make sure that you're thinking about all of the different cases in the code that you're writing. And then go back and type it into an IDE, so you learn those frequent mistakes. So I think that's a really good way to prepare for technical questions and for writing things on paper. This is just a list of core concepts that you should be familiar with going into any interview. So the most commonly targeted learning outcomes are related to either data structures or algorithms. So the structures you should know: linked lists, trees, tries. We haven't really gone over tries, but algorithms will. Graphs, stacks and queues, heaps. C-based languages call them vectors. Java-based languages call them array lists. So that really is the same thing: vectors and arrays, vectors and array lists, and then hash tables. So be familiar with all of those. In fact, hash tables are the single most frequently queried structure in interview settings. So go back and make sure that you have a solid understanding of hash tables, because they're among the more difficult structures. They're among the most frequently queried. Algorithms you should be aware of: breadth first search we've talked about, depth first search we've talked about, binary search we briefly covered, merge sort and quick sort we covered. To be familiar with all of those, you're ready for an internship interview if you have these ideas, or you know these structures and algorithms at an intuitive level. Some concepts that you'll want to be aware of: bit manipulation. This is something that frequently gets tested on the higher end of the difficulty of questions. I'll give you an example of this later today or tomorrow, depending. Know the difference between stack memory and heap memory. Be able to solve problems recursively and talk about a recursive versus an iterative solution. Dynamic programming is going to come in algorithms. I think I introduced the idea very briefly, very briefly in here, but don't worry if you don't know it too well. It's just basically pre-computing information so that you can do a lookup to a subproblem rather than recalculating the same subproblem over and over again. Then know your time and space complexity, be able to analyze everything that you do to be able to say, is it optimal? Could a better solution exist? What trade-offs could you look for in a solution? Maybe you have the optimal time solution, but it's not the optimal memory solution. You could say, I could trade off saving some space and having it take a little bit longer, which recognizing the different implementations that you could make can make all the difference in an interviewer seeing, I solved the problem this way, but I know what trade-offs I can make to improve the efficiency of this given some efficiency parameters. So this isn't comprehensive, but I like this as just a basic list. Everything, almost everything that we've gone over in this class is everything that you could need to know in terms of the core concepts. They will query you with something that you haven't seen before. So you will be solving a problem you haven't seen before. But the underlying structures and processes that you need to use will probably come from one of these. So it's a matter of, can you recognize when to apply them, given the problem? What should you do? You're given a problem and you now need to solve it on a whiteboard. How should you go about it? The first one is to listen carefully to the problem. Everything that is a part of the problem is going to be a necessary part of your problem solving process and part of the solution. So if the interviewer says, given two arrays that are sorted, you may not remember later on that you get the guarantee that these arrays are sorted, and that will change your approach. That will change the optimal runtime of your answer. Just make a note of every little piece of information that the interviewer gives you for a problem, because it's probably relevant. Very different algorithms will be needed to worry about something that's not sorted versus something that is sorted. Because you can't just assume that you're going to sort them first, because that's already an n log n task. If the optimal answer is in big O of n, you've already exceeded your allowable runtime by deciding that you're going to sort them. It shows that you can't listen to instructions, you're not detail oriented. Keep something to write on or with, a notebook, a phone, probably a notebook. It looks more professional than having your phone out during an interview. And just make notes whenever they're describing the problem, make sure that you write down keywords. As soon as they've finished, before you even worry about code, draw out an example. So if they say something like, given a binary search tree, give yourself an example on the board. So kind of in the top left corner, just draw a small tree and give yourself values. Make sure that it's a big enough example that it generalizes. But then you can use that as your visualizer as you're writing the code. There's nothing that says you can't do that in an interview. Give yourself the visual tools to make sure that you're visualizing the problem to the best of your ability, so that when you go to write the code, you have something to tie back to visually. It's important that it is a good example. So you want to be able to capture general behavior and patterns. You don't want to have to interpret it more than what's there to try to figure that out. If you're having trouble visualizing immediately the optimal solution, start thinking with just a brute force solution. Even if you're talking out loud and not coding yet, the interviewer will see that you're not just spinning your wheels, you are solving the problem, and then you recognize this is a brute force solution, not an optimal solution, but you're using it to have a solution to start with to optimize. How can I improve from this brute force solution? Oh, I can use dynamic programming on this brute force solution to reduce the runtime, something like that. If you're doing this, make sure that you're talking about out loud, argue why it's not efficient enough and why the complexity that is there, but it is a solution to the problem. From there, just worry about optimizing any unused information that the interviewer gave you, stuff like the array is sorted. If you gave a brute force solution without the arrays sorted, you can now remove that process. Go draw a different example. Make sure that anything that you're working with still works on that. You can solve it incorrectly. If you're absolutely stuck, work on some kind of incorrect or partially correct solution. Recognize that that's what you're doing, and then say, I'm trying to figure out details of the correct solution through this process. And the interviewer can work with you, or maybe even give you a hint or two as they see you working on it. But what they'll see is they're not giving up, and they also recognize that what they're doing is inefficient and or wrong. They're just playing around with it to try to come up with the correct solution. Recognize time versus space trade-offs. Pre-compute information where you can. Use a hash table. Very frequently, the solution to problems in an interviewing setting is a hash table. Make sure you're actually designing your solution before you jump into the coding. So for those of you who are also in 212, utilize some design concepts. Make sure you know what your variables are gonna be, make sure you know the appropriate time when they're going to change. That will minimize the amount of reordering or erasing that you're going to have to do if you're doing the planning ahead of time. Finally, it's time to implement your code. You only have however big these problems are to show that you can develop good code. So you want to make sure that the code that you're writing on a whiteboard is putting your best foot forward. So think about, am I doing any error checking? Some interviewers will really care that you're throwing the appropriate exceptions, and others will not care at all and just look for, can they generate the solution and in cases that are supposed to work. That may be something that you can ask the interviewer while you're writing the code. Do you want me to consider error cases? Because then they know you're aware of it and you can let them tell you the extent to which you should be doing that. Don't waste your time if they're not gonna evaluate. You don't have to keep your solution to a single class. Some problems are actually designed as, do you understand object-oriented programming? So utilize an inheritance structure, write an interface, make sure that you recognize problems that are actually targeting OO concepts. Pay attention to your own variable names. You want them to be clear and concise. This is part of something that they will be looking for. Don't use single letter variables, even if the problem is relatively simple. If you use long names for your variables, it's okay if you abbreviate them after the first use. You can write out some long variable name and then shorten it to a couple letters and just tell your interviewer that's what I'm doing. That will save you time writing on the board, but also shows that you know and understand and care about variable names. Finally, tests, you can't actually write unit tests for this, but you can conceptualize some tests. Just look at each line and verify and make sure it's doing what you think it is. Look for things like off by one errors, wherever you're doing less than length. Are you sure that's correct and not less than length minus one or less than or equal to length? Make sure you're thinking about special cases. What happens if it's zero, if it's null, if something, make sure there's the appropriate ifs to catch that behavior. Make sure that your base case, if it's a recursive problem, is correct. You're anticipating integer division and you're not expecting that the result gives you a fraction. If it doesn't, make sure you're casting things correctly. Just general frequent errors that I see in 210 and 211 students, just make sure you're not doing those in the interview setting. And I do have a couple of example technical questions that we could either start with now or we could come back to, and I'll let the 6 people here vote on this. So the last lecture component is just looking at an offer and trying to figure out how do you evaluate an offer that you get. We want to talk about that now. We want to talk about that at the start of tomorrow's class. Or do we want to jump into some example technical questions where I say, get out a piece of paper and you have 15 minutes to code something that directly out of cracking the coding interview is a common interview type question. That's what we'll be doing for any remaining time today and tomorrow that we're not talking about an offer. Anyone have an opinion?
Let's do the offer first.
Offer first?
Yeah, that's fine.
So offers are going to come in with an associated deadline. So you should, if you have multiple offers, or if you're waiting for an offer from another company, you should make sure that you're communicating any offers that you're getting, not their associated salaries. They just need to know, I have an offer with this associated deadline. Do not give them any more information than they need to know. By your holding that information back, you can use it as negotiation leverage. We'll talk about that in a second. But just share, if I don't hear back from you by this date, I will be taking another offer. Something like that. And that puts pressure on them to either give you an offer, or if they have an offer out, then to apply pressure on the other person to which the offer is out if you were a backup candidate or something. So very much can be used as negotiation leverage. make sure that you're thinking about if you're going to decline an offer. Do so politically. You want to make sure that you are coming across professionally, even in the case where maybe they're dead to you for now. You want to make sure that if you end up reapplying, that you're on good terms with them. Let's take a look at the components to think about with an offer. So obviously the salary, but the salary is only it's the big component, but it is not the only component of an offer. You can look at one-time benefits like a signing bonus or relocation, especially if you're anticipating using this job as a jumping off point and maybe you're looking to hop in a couple of years. One-time benefits can actually be significant salary increases when amortized over the couple of years that you plan to be there. So if they're gonna give you a $5,000 signing bonus, if you're staying there for 2 years, it's equivalent to a $2,500 salary increase. So just thinking about the one-time benefits versus how long am I going to be in this position? Any cost of living adjustments, if you end up with an offer down in Silicon Valley, make sure that the salary aligns with the cost of living that is going to be down there if they require it to be in person, or if there's an in-office requirement for a Seattle area job. Seattle is significantly more expensive than Spokane, and Silicon Valley is 30% more expensive than Seattle. So just make sure that the salary is significantly higher for the same position there. If you're just gonna take a position there because there's a $5,000 higher salary, then you may end up in a significantly worse position overall in a few years. There are annual bonuses that you might want to consider. Sometimes these bonuses are profit shares that either are a variable range or may not happen. You will want to look at the history of those annual bonuses for people in similar positions to you. Do you get a 5% on average profit share? Do you get an average of a 10% profit share? And usually this is based on your base salary. So if there is an annual bonus, then it is worth arguing for a higher base salary over higher one-time benefits, because the annual bonus is a multiplier to your salary. Just think about optimizing what is important to you. Stock options, a lot of tech companies that are on the rise, especially if they're some kind of startup company, be aware of the risks of stock options. They may not be worth as much as they're telling you that they will be in 5 years or 10 years. Look at the growth rate of the company going into this to see what the stock options may be worth. But you absolutely can sell those stock options as additional income. Health benefits, just take a look at the quality of the package as well as how much it costs you to pay into that. Is it completely company covered, or are you required to pay $100, $200 out of pocket per month for your health benefits? Look at retirement contributions. This can be, again, based off of your salary or a salary match. Because retirement is exponential, you're gonna make an average of something like, let's say, 5% on any contributions that you have in your retirement. The earlier you start those contributions and the more you have those contributions early on in your career, the more time they're going to have to gain value. So it's very important to, if you're going to have a large 401k when you retire, get those good matches early. Or also think about putting some additional money from your salary into your retirement account, because that can make a huge difference down the line. The longer you have it in there, it just exponentially grows. We've seen how exponential growth looks in algorithms. Think of what the exponential growth looks like in your retirement account. Also, really evaluate the company's requirements for overtime. A lot of tech companies require crunch time right in your deadlines, and they might have you working significant amounts of overtime. So really think about, am I getting enough money to make it okay that I'm working 80 hours a week, a few weeks out of the year? Or how frequently is that happening? You should certainly be looking at and thinking about that as part of accepting an offer. We'll talk about happiness here momentarily.
There extra pay for those, is it salary, right? So it's like, for the spend time, do they have extra pay for that? We should know. Not necessarily.
Yeah, it's your salary, so they'll say things like, you may need to work this long or this much. It's something that you really need to consider, or is there extra compensation for it? Some companies do compensate for crunch time, but some companies do not.
Yeah.
So that's very important to know ahead of time before they make you miserable. It's important in any offer as well to think about, what does this look like? What trajectory does this put me on for the rest of my career? So consider your opportunities for learning and growth and management potential. So how good does this company look on my resume? Will this help me to land a future position because I've worked here? How much am I going to learn? Is what I'm learning relevant to my next position? Think about, if you hop from this position in 2 or 3 years, will it prepare you for higher paying careers, higher paying positions at other companies? What is the promotion plan within this company? Is it something that is looked at every 6 months, every 12 months? What is the evaluation for promotion? Is it even possible for this role to transition into a management role? On average, how long does it take a solid junior developer to transition into a management role? Some companies will say, we don't really do that within the first 10 years, in which case it might go, "Ugh, if your goal is to be a manager, maybe that tells you, if I accept this position, I may want to hop after 2 or 3 years, because you're still getting the experience to become a manager. You might be able to have an interview with another company that says, I have these 2 or 3 years of junior developer experience. That company allows transitions to management within 5 years. And so now you're on a 2-year track to management after this experience. Think about the company's trajectory. Is it growing? Is it shrinking? Why is that happening? If the company is shrinking, they're gonna take the most recently hired people and fire them. So what is your job security looking like? Is it gonna be performance-based, or is it gonna be how frequent or how recently they were hired?
But some of these questions, could you ask in the interview?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I would, for something like, is the company or team growing or shrinking? I would do that research, because you'll be able to see things like that frequently posted somewhere. But you could ask for things, anything that's not clear online in the interview, absolutely,
Okay,
especially for things that are important to you.
like the promotions and that type of stuff.
Yeah, these are absolutely questions you can ask during the interview, things like average times. Even if the interviewer doesn't know, they can forward that request on to HR to figure out and let you know. And that can become part of your decision to accept the offer or not. You can also think about other options in that area. If you're gonna take a position that is, I don't know, some remote town somewhere. If you transition from that to another position, you will probably have to move. Think about how that move is going to affect your family, how that move is gonna affect your own mental health. If you have a significant other, what does their work look like? Are they able to hop as easily? If you have kids, what are the effects of moving schools going to be on kids? All of those are very important to be trying to think about upfront when you take a position. You can also look at the kind of company's history. Are they a company that's been around for 20 years and they have a history of stability? So working for Microsoft's not going under in the next 5 years. It has too big of a hole and it's very stable. On the other hand, if you work at a startup, the startup may completely take off, but it's kind of a risk versus reward decision. If you work for a startup and it gets bought out, you may end up with a significant payout from that purchase. On the other hand, you may not have a job in a few weeks if things don't turn out well for the company. So there's definitely a stability. How stable do you need the position? How willing are you to take risks? And then do you buy into the associated risks? Do you buy that the product that's being produced is going to lead to significant profit and growth? If the company is mismanaging itself, or if the product doesn't target enough people, or it's not a significant development over something that already exists. Maybe working for that startup isn't the best idea, or you may wanna immediately start looking for other positions. Because you don't know if you're gonna have a job in the long term. Last thing to really consider is how happy are you going to be? So, do you believe in and support what the company is doing? Do you believe in the product? Do you think that you're making a difference to people, and do you see the profit in that? Does it align with your morals and goals for what you want to do for a career? Are you going to get along with your manager and coworkers? Asking about company culture is something that is really important in an interview. You want to make sure that you can, I'll say this momentarily, but be yourself in your workplace environment. You don't want to have to put on a facade every day to interact with the people around you. That's going to take a long-term toll on you. So, yeah, what is the company culture? Does it vibe with your personal culture? Can you be yourself at work? Also, of course, the hours, the crunch time, does that match with whether you're a morning person, or just think about how it works with your family and your family's requirements. Does this really make sense given everything that you need to be doing in your life? Finally, the art of negotiation, a very, very, very important part of the process. So you receive an offer. How do you maximize that offer? How do you work with people to have the best package possible to work for them? So, as mentioned yesterday, I think every Washington state posting must have a salary range, which makes this process a lot easier.
I'm curious, why does that belong? Seems interesting.
Yeah, it's recent. It's as of just a few years ago.
Really?
Yeah,
You know
and
the reason behind it?
I think it's meant to be for transparency. So historically, in the job hunt, the company has held a lot of the cards. And so it leads to people just kind of wasting a lot of their time applying to positions that once you've already gone through the first and second round interview process, you hear, oh, this comes with a salary of 30K. I'm not remotely interested in working for 30K. No matter how easy this job is, that just doesn't fit my needs. You waste time to apply, to talk to them on the phone, and they won't talk about salary until you're in the second round interview. They feel like they have you on the ropes. So the salary range can tell you where to apply, how much effort to put into an application, whether it's a kind of a reach for you or something that you feel like you can get.
I know it's sort of like a joke question, but is there anything like if you're a person starting out applying for these jobs? Naturally, a person would be drawn out on your salary. How can you have self-awareness about what their job is?
Look at the requirements. If you meet every required, I would say that I feel like it's a good fit if I meet the requirements, the absolute requirements, but then for some of the optional stuff, or most of the optional stuff, I don't really meet that. That's a solid maybe. If you meet all of the optional requirements, or I would say that you're overqualified for the position. And if you don't quite meet all of the minimum requirements, I would say you're underqualified for the position. It shouldn't keep you from applying, if that it would be the job you would take if you got it, or you feel like you could quickly become that person and you could sell that in an interview. Especially for computer scientists, negotiation is something that a lot of people will shy away from. Don't shy away from it, do it. Do it, it's expected as part of the process of hiring. If a company is not willing to negotiate with you, how are they going to treat you when you're actually working here? At least that's the approach that I take to it. If at all possible, apply to enough places where you have multiple offers. That gives you a ton of leverage. It means that you can really go out on a limb and take risks with the offers to try to get more. Whatever offer you're not thinking about taking, if you have two offers, you rank them. I want this first, this second. Go to the second and really work them to try to get to the point where it flips. If they can match your requirements to where it flips, go back to your old first choice, it's now your second choice. Try to get them to where it flips, and where that process stops, take your top choice. Don't ask for generic things like I want more. Instead, have an actual ask when you go in for it. I will accept the offer if you give me this. And then overshoot it. Over whatever it is that you would accept, ask for more than that. Don't ask for an obscene amount more than that. But ask for something that's within the salary range, but is still more than you would accept. And that way you can settle on something that you would accept. If you only ask for what you want, someone will try to negotiate you down from there. And then it will seem less desirable. So if you start higher, people will just feel like they've successfully negotiated with you if you reach that middle. If the company cannot budge on salary, think about the other aspects that they can budge on. So they may be able to pay you more relocation, one-time benefits, especially if you're only gonna be working there for 2 or 3 years. So that's the plan. The one-time benefits will amortize down to half or a third of their value in terms of a yearly contribution, so you can ask for more one-time benefits. Signing bonus could be something else, that if they have the pool of money for a signing bonus, but not for a long-term salary, they may be more willing to budge on that. If they can't budge on salary, can they budge on stock options? Just be aware of all of the negotiation tools that you have at your disposal, so that you can go in. One thing that I didn't think of when I was negotiating for this position came with, there is no salary room for negotiation. What I did negotiate for was the absolute maximum amount of startup funds to be able to put into research or tools or toys or things that I can do, options that I have. Yeah, the toys are an Oculus, a Meta Quest, not technological toys. Get your head out of trash.
I mean, look at your, that's a lot of magic cards you have, that's a lot of toys right there.
I have to be able to say there's a work-related reason for them, but yeah, can't go buying magic, unfortunately. Love to do that. What I didn't think of, and that Tony Espinoza thought of, was course releases. Something like, you don't have to teach as many courses over the course of the year. You're still paid as much, but you get a release for that. That was something that I didn't consider and didn't even think about. And when I heard that he'd done it, I was like, that is so smart. Just be aware of all of those variables, whatever is relevant to you in a position that you could request as part of that. It could be working less in addition to being paid more. Just think of all of the variables, figure out what they're willing to budge on. And then the other part is recognize your personal negotiation strengths and weaknesses and negotiate over your preferred medium. You get a choice of really calling them, Zooming with them, or emailing them. So go with something that is going to be comfortable for you. If you're not as solid on the spot, do it over email. And that way you can think about your response, make your response professional, and you're not gonna be put on the spot to make a decision on the fly. Recruiters have done this over and over and over again, so they're very practiced about how to handle pressure on the spot. Some people are good at that, some people are really not. If they say, hey, can I call you? Say, can you send this over email instead? That request can make sure that it's an email negotiation and it plays to your strengths. All right, we are out of time, but we're going to spend all of tomorrow's class getting practice with interview types of questions. I'm going to use actual questions out of this book that looks at computer science interviews. And we'll start with some easy ones, and we can also look at some of the more difficult ones just to know and see what could you expect in an interview setting. So we'll see you tomorrow for that.
When in doubt, use a hash map,
I did talk about those in this class.
it's good. Is that doing anything, or no?